like to introduce tonight's featured speaker, Jan Blacksall, a registered early childhood educator. Jan taught early childhood education courses at both Fanshawe College and Conestoga College for 30 years. She was a member of the Best Start expert panel on early learning. She has also co-authored the text, Children at the Center, Principles of Early Childhood Education in Canada, and contributes to articles in the Canadian Child Care Federation's journal Interaction, as well as an editor and contributor for the Ideas Journal of Emotional Wellbeing. Jan is also a trainer for Kids Have Stress Too and Second Step programs. Currently, she provides consultations and professional learning sessions to RECEs and Child Care Centre staff, as well as offers online learning modules and webinars through the Early Years Professional Development Centre, Dominion Learning Institute of Canada, where she's the Director of Program Development. So this is over to you, Jan. Thank you very much. I can hear you. Yes, great.
Okay. Well, I would like to just say how honored and privileged I feel to be here chatting with you tonight, and how much I want to thank the College of ECE for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. And I will say that through my time of working with children and observing children as a faculty member visiting into child care centers, I firmly believe that we can't say enough about the importance of relationships. So this webinar really appealed to me. Okay, so the overview of the standard that we're talking about is anticipation and prevention, and I want to talk to you about those things, and then remind you that in many cases you're like a first responder to a 911 call from a child. You need to have a plan, and when the situation is really a difficult situation, you need to do some relationship CPR. So hopefully by the end of the evening you'll have some ideas and strategies that you can take with you. I feel pretty strongly that you can't really do anything well if you just get the strategies without really understanding the reasons for it. So we will spend a little bit of time on some theory as well. Okay, so there's the standard we were talking about, the importance of strong positive relationships for healthy child development, well-being, and learning, and that this is fundamental to what we do as early childhood educators. Those relationships are crucial. And from the practice guideline, which I was absolutely thrilled to see, it's just full of amazing information. And I think it's really important that we understand that it is a time of reframing of the definition of behavior guidance. We have a long history of being part of talking about things like behavior management and classroom management. Sorry, I've got an itchy nose. And I think we really in the 21st century have come to a much more in-depth understanding of the role that we have in not managing children's behavior, but guiding their development to the point where they can self-regulate and engage in positive interactions. Okay. And my personal belief system around guidance is that this is a partnership. The child and the early childhood educator, the RECE, are together on this journey. And as such, each person contributes something to this journey of guidance. Both the child and the RECE have their own perspectives, they have their own emotional reactions, and they both act according to their own understanding of their own needs in a situation. And you'll recognize this, I'm sure. Think, Feel, Act is a very important part of the Ministry of Education's approach to the framework for childcare. And it's also a popular combination of thinking in self-regulation work, in cognitive behavior therapy. And it's really about trying to understand the connection between our thoughts, our feelings, and our action. So, again, coming from the practice guideline, what we think when we respond to children's behavior is influenced by many, many factors. Some of these are the experiences in education that you've had. I'm going to say how long ago you had it, where you had it, whether you've been updating your professional growth since you were in school, policies that you have in your childcare workplace, your program statement, things that the family brings to you, requests that the family brings to you about their own style of guidance and their own understanding of their child needs. The workplace, the conditions in your workplace, whether it's a calm and soothing workplace or whether it's fast-paced and a little bit chaotic, can really influence us as well, because it can influence our own self-regulation and stress management. Responding to children's behavior is a very, very highly personal and cultural dimension as well. Many of us respond to children the way our parents responded to us and raised us. And because we turned out fine, we are perfectly comfortable doing what our parents did. And we sometimes have to reflect on that a little bit and make sure that we're practicing within current understanding of children's needs. And we also need to be very sensitive to a variety of cultural beliefs. Not all cultures have the same goals for children, and we really need to know our families well. And we can't ignore our own personal coping strategies. What do we do when we get stressed and dysregulated? How do we handle situations that are challenging? And at any one time with any one child, any of these factors can be the driving force in how you respond to a particular behavior. Okay, so the topic is about anticipating challenges, and I'm going to say to you that there will be challenges. Anticipation can be apprehension. You can come into your program in the morning worrying about the difficult children you have, the ones who might disrupt the plans that you have, the misbehaviors that you might have to deal with, your anxiety about a particularly challenging behavior that some children may be exhibiting. And if those are your thoughts, then your feelings will reflect those thoughts. Stress, maybe frustration that you have to always think about that one child before you can carry out your planning. Sometimes even anger. Some kids push our buttons. Some kids make us more angry than their behavior would necessarily warrant. And if we're in a state, an emotional state of stress or frustration or anger, there's a very good chance that we are going to react to a child off the top of our heads or without really a planned intervention. And sometimes we can overreact if we're not really carefully thinking about what we want to be doing. Okay, so what we want to do is to take that apprehension out of the anticipation. And that's where reframing becomes important. Rethinking our views of children, our beliefs, I can remember very early on in my career as an early childhood educator, I read a statement by a psychologist named Daniel Gartrell. He said, "There is no such thing as a bad child." And that has stayed with me always. There is no such thing as a bad child. And there's no such thing as a behavior kid. I have such a hard time when I hear people talking about a group of children that they call the behavior kids. They're children, and their behavior is part of them. It's part of their way of communicating. It's part of their way of dealing with stress. Another thing that Stuart Shanker would have us really think about is that when we're thinking about children's behavior, we shouldn't be thinking about compliance and control, about them being obedient, but instead about them being self-regulated and able to make good choices. Another thing that has helped me a lot is coming to understand that negative consequences won't change behavior. Negative consequences that we impose typically increase the child's stress level. And when we increase the child's stress level, we increase the challenging behavior that we're trying to reduce. Another thing that is very important for us to remember is that the child has a problem when they're misbehaving or behaving in a way that we see as misbehaving. They have a need and they don't know how to address their need or solve their problem. And so their behavior becomes that communication, that message to you, I don't know what to do here. And we really need, as part of our planned intervention, is to really observe for a minute, take a deep breath and say, what does the child need in this moment? And I think it's really important to stay focused in the moment and not be worried about looking too far into the future, about, is this never going to stop? It's not going to stop in that moment, but you can address what the child is needing and start to build some of the foundations for the self-regulated behavior we want to see. Okay, so when you change your thoughts to be more child focused and more understanding, and you recognize that the child isn't out to get you, it isn't deliberately behaving, then you can start to feel some compassion for what the child is going through. And you can stay calm because you can say, this isn't about me, even though we're in this together. The child is sending me a message, and the message isn't one of defiance or of dislike. It's one of stress and hurting. And when we're compassionate and calm, then our actions can become more helpful to the situation. When we approach a child with no anger or frustration on our face, with a very genuine expression of caring, they're more open to connect with us. They're easier to comfort. They can begin to co-regulate, and down the road you can start to coach them. Okay, what might you do in this situation? What's a good strategy? And I just find it interesting that all of those words start with C. So when you're trying to think of how you might address a challenging situation, keep the letter C in your mind, and maybe that'll help to be a little trigger of remembering to stay compassionate and calm and work on connecting and comforting. Okay, so that's us as an RECE, really trying to look at our own thoughts, our own feelings about the child. And then we take it from the child's point of view. And the child may also be approaching situations with apprehension. This little girl is looking pretty happy, but sometimes you can see a child who comes in and they start their day in a state of distress or unhappiness. And again, we look at the think, feel, act pattern. What we might see is the child feeling like, I'm alone. I don't like what's happening here. I don't want to be here or do this. I remember my cousin's little guy went to kindergarten. His first day he came home and he said, Mom, don't sign me up for any more of those lessons because I'm not going back. And I think it's just so important to realize how many children also approach their days with apprehension. And they feel the strong emotions of stress, sadness, anxiety, and sometimes anger that they have to be there, that they don't want to be there. And again, when we get that pattern of thinking and feeling, we're going to get the action that is a reaction and sometimes an overreaction to the situation because the child isn't in a state of calm. And then we have to talk about the role that stress plays. And this is a huge part of anticipation. Knowing your children. Stress is part of life. Stress comes from bumps in the road. Maybe the child is moving. Just to give you another quick example, another child in my life circle started a new new grade 1, new school, and they had moved as well to a new house. And she was very stressed, but she was managing pretty well until one day she came home and she said, I can't go back to school next week, Mom. And the mother said, why? And she said, because I can't do the Terry Fox run. And the crisis for her was something was being expected of her that she didn't understand. She was in a new neighborhood, in a new school. She didn't have all of those connections that were part of her sense of security. And that one thing that was unexpected, unanticipated, was the one thing that was creating a bump in the road for her. Family issues, things going on at home, peer issues, being excluded, being told you can't play, you can't come to my birthday, being part of an aggression community where children fight out their differences rather than problem solve in more appropriate ways. All of those things can create levels of stress that can be problematic for children. And I've called those levels of stress tolerable for a reason that I'll come back to. So because of those bumps in the road, we really need to access as much available information as we have about the family situation. And a big part of our relationships are collaborating with families, having those conversations. There are specific questions that the ministry requires that parents share with child care centers when they enroll their child. I think there should be another set of questions that just gather information about a little bit about the child's life, about any things that might be challenging for the child, things that you might need to keep in mind when you're dealing with a child who's not as calm and alert as we might hope. So, children at risk. There are such a wide variety of adversity, and sometimes it's mild, and I think one of the biggest things is a disconnect between what the child needs and how the adults understand them. Tell you a lovely story about a little boy who he and his mother had moved 3 times because they had left a pretty negative father relationship, and then they had rejoined the mother's birth family, and the relationship with her father was also negative, and then they had to relocate again and then again. And so the little boy was really struggling, and his behavior was showing off his stress to his mother. And I just had a conversation with him, and I said, "Sounds like things are going pretty rough for you." And he says, "Yeah." I says, "What's going on?" He says, "Oh, I'm just so worried about my mom." I said, What are you worried about?" He says, "She's just so upset." And I said, "Oh, and is there something that you would like to happen?" And he says, I just wish she would stop yelling at me and hitting me. Maybe if she could just remember to kind of stop and take a big breath when she was chasing me, maybe it would be better." So again, we see this little guy whose needs are totally misread by the mother, who sees him as a behavior challenge when in reality he's just picking up on the stress that she's going through. And then, even though Canada is one of the best places in the world to live, we have many children who are exposed to severe forms of adversity, severe poverty that can lead to neglect, domestic violence, child abuse, any newcomer children that might have been exposed to war or total deprivation. And the reality is those kids are coming into our programs. They may not have a sign on them saying, "I've had a rough go," but sometimes their behavior will be the way that they'll let you know that their life has been tough. So we need to anticipate, and again, going back to that anticipating, some children are going to come to us with deep hurt and pain, with not a lot of trust that adults can be counted on to meet their needs. Sometimes with some pretty raw emotions. Might be pretty upset that people aren't understanding where they're coming from. And some children come to us with just really basic unmet needs for safety and connection. And we're gonna talk a lot about that still. So we had the slide earlier about the children in tolerable stress. And now we've got a child, I'm going to say, is in toxic stress, who's also coming into our program with apprehension, thinking some of the same thoughts. I'm alone, it's not safe here, I can't trust, I have to look out for myself, and feeling a more extreme issues of distress, depression, fear, anger, and many of their behaviors are overreactions. And the difference between a child in tolerable stress and toxic stress is whether there's an adult in their life, a person. And so I think we have to be aware of that as well. Okay, so we have our children in our relationship, and here's another child who's in a very stress situation, but because they have a trusted relationship, the difference is we've got children who don't feel alone, who understand that there is someone they can trust and that they're not on their own to look out for their own needs. So prevention, we've talked a lot about anticipation. And if we're going to anticipate these challenges coming through the door, then we need to plan ways to prevent some of those challenging behaviors from being realized. Your relationship with the child is the most important tool you have. Kaiser and Razminsky have been teaching about and writing about meeting challenging behavior issues for many years, and I can't disagree with them at all. The relationship is the most important tool. And Dr. Jean Clinton, who I think you've probably saw her video a little bit earlier on, is just reminding us the more connection that we have with children, the less need there is for correcting, for directing, and managing their behavior. So the bottom line, there's no supportive relationship. Children have less self-regulation. They can't trust you enough to co-regulate with you. The challenging behaviors continue. Learning is hindered, and social interactions are problematic. Okay, so the goal is for you to be the person. When you're the person for the child, your intervention, your involvement can be a form of prevention. So you need to recognize, anticipate, and meet the needs that you're recognizing through the child's behavior. When are they falling apart? What are they falling apart about? And it might be those universal needs that we talked about for safety, protection, security, feeling a sense of belonging and well-being, or it might be individual needs, things that are going on at home or in the peer group that you need. It might be temperament, it might be learning challenges, sorry. You have to get to know the child as an individual. Okay, so we have some time left to really talk about the strategies. 4 main strategies, and these are the core of early childhood education. I'm not going to be telling you anything that's outrageous or extraordinary that you have to do. Okay, so we're going to build relationships, we're going to keep our environment calm and safe, we're going to have a social emotional curriculum. And this is very big now in both education and early childhood education. Do you have social emotional learning as one of the foundations of your program? And then we need to have plans for any crisis moments. Okay. Stanley Greenspan was a child psychiatrist. He talked a lot about children with early challenges. And I think this quote is really important. Building a relationship with a child is not always easy, but the situation that develops if you don't isn't going to be easy either. So we need to reach out and we need to make a commitment to any child that you find difficult and say, oh, I'm going to connect with that child. When? In playtimes. Be on the floor with them. Engage with them. Try to let them know that you're meeting them halfway. It's as if we're making a deposit in a child's relationship piggy bank when we do this. And I want to to just tell you about a couple of children, just to give you a little bit of a sense of what this is like. There was a little girl who came from a very difficult situation. She had just been taken from her home and put into foster care. And she was in the senior preschool room at a childcare I used to visit. And when I went in one morning, she was sitting on the RECE's lap. And they were just kind of cuddling and checking together. And then the ECE said, well, are you ready to go and play now? And the little girl said, will you play with me? And he said, yes, I will. And she said, okay, then I'll play. And she said, what do you want to play? And she said, I want to play baby. I want to be your baby, and I want you to take care of me. Now, the beauty of doing your connecting during playtime is that you can do that. You can, and this little girl went and pulled some of the baby clothes out of the doll play center and brought them over, and the RECE put a little teeny tiny hat on her head and tried to just make that deposit into her relationship piggy bank. Okay, stay close by. This is a huge part for children who, if you want to prevent some of those challenging behaviors. Again, another very quick little story. One of my ECE students in a class, we were talking about supporting children that needed a little bit of extra. And she said she had a little guy his challenges came when he was playing, and very quickly the play would fall apart and he'd be hitting and then he'd be pulled out of play. And the student said, I remember being like that as a child, and I really feel for him. So she just made a commitment that she would stay close by, and when things were falling apart, she would catch it before he got too upset and say, you know, do you want some help to resolve this, or do you want to come with me and we'll spend some time doing something else? And it was not that you have to leave because you've messed up here. It was a very caring and supportive option for the child. Okay, I don't think I need to say too much about this, but make sure that your environment does have the cozy corners, the comfort zones, the places for a child to be alone, and whatever self-soothing alternatives the child needs. Many kids, they can be anything, and you'll be surprised if you start having these conversations with kids, what they find soothing. Conversations with children, I call them caring dialogues, because they're not one-way conversations. They're really paying attention and listening to the messages that children are giving. An awful lot of them are pre- and nonverbal. Their facial expressions, their body postures, they're showing us that they're not in a state of well-being. And then some of them send those messages in a very powerful and aggressive way when they feel trapped or threatened or overwhelmed by their emotions. And no matter which of those situations, we have to try and hear the message the child is sending. And we have to let them know that it matters to us. And then another goal that we're trying to meet is by facilitating the child's understanding of those emotions, helping them to get to a place where some of their communications may be more verbal and less behavioral, and helping them to understand that think, feel, act link. That you wanted the toy, you thought it was yours, you got upset when someone else took it, and then you got angry, and then you acted. And the child can learn that there's 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 different ways to act. We need, again, I think there's a little bit of a repeat, but to make sure that we're teaching this, not just in problem-solving situations, not just when they come up in challenging situations, but in our group times, we need to be modeling and using emotional vocabulary, talking about the 4 main emotions: happy, sad, mad, and upset, worried, scared. We need to understand that the child has the right to feel the emotion that they feel and accept it, and not try to say, no, they don't hate you, or no, that you don't need to be worried about that. The child is worried. They do feel rejected. We need to offer concern for that. I'm really sorry. Here, let's talk about that. Come, sit with me. And there are just amazing books out there now, more and more. I remember 10 years ago teaching this, and you couldn't find good books on social emotional learning, but now everybody's getting into the act. Photographs, magazines. I cut a lot of my photographs out of parent magazines. Okay, and then our 911 call. So the child is having a crisis. They feel that they're threatened, and I had a little guy like this in a kindergarten. He would get angry, frustrated with the other kids, and he would explode. You know, hit people, try to throw furniture, tip tables over. His behavior was very clearly a 911 call. And whether we thought that there was a danger or a threat in the room didn't matter. So I was leading the teachers in that room, the ECEs, and I said, okay, we need a plan here. We need a really clear plan. And with that plan, then we all felt much calmer and more ready to deal. So that child was feeling flooded. He was feeling upset, unsafe. He didn't want to feel that way. And he appreciated the support that he had to not feel that way. So I can tell you one instance where they had actually, two of them had kind of moved him out into the hall so that he wouldn't hurt anybody else. And there was another teacher that was kind of standing guard, and I got to him and I went right up to him really close and I squatted down, and the other teacher said, no, don't get that close, he's going to hurt you. And he said, no, he's not going to hurt me, watch. And I said, okay, hey buddy, I'm here, whoa, calm. You're safe, and I need to help you out with this problem. And that's what our relationship CPR is. Calm language, singing, humming, breathing together with the child, slowing his heart rate down and getting his breathing down to yours. So that's why it's so important that you are calm, because the child's reaction to stress is going to stay high if you are also stressed. But the closeness, the slowness, the quietness will slowly calm them down. And then a really clear message of protection. You're okay. You're safe. No one's going to hurt you. We're going to figure this out. Do you want me to hold you? Do you want to sit on my lap? And you always ask before touching, because that can be a trigger. And then, do you want to be alone? There's a safe place that you can go that no one will bother you. And that protection is so valuable to the child because it allows them to regain their sense of calm. And then respect. I get how upset you are. I get how angry you are. And I'm just, I'm hoping that there's time to tell you one more quick story. I'm going to fit this around how you would start this this relationship building with a child. And it's about one of our ECE graduates that we ran into when we were doing our Kids Have Stress 2 training. And she was in a JK-SK class as the designated ECE. And she had a very challenging little girl in that program who had just come into the JK class from a move out of her biological family and into foster care. And she was in toxic stress. And I just want to tell you that the year that we saw them had been a full year later. And she said, the ECE said, I'm so glad that I learned what I learned in college, because this little girl I wouldn't have known what to do with otherwise. And she said, I just spent all of my time last year just working on our relationship, and we spent so much time. You know, when she would fall apart, I would take her hand, we would walk outside, we would walk up and down the hallway. She said wasn't easy. You know, there were a lot of times in the beginning where I just had to stand there while she thrashed around on the floor and kicked, and the kindergarten teacher would get the other children back so that no one was in danger. And so she said, this was a year later, and she said, we are doing so well now. She is doing so well. And she said, this is what happened today. She said, I do give her stickers, and she said, I know that stickers aren't always necessary for a lot of kids, but for her, she needs that visual evidence that she's done well. So she talked about she had a total meltdown, and she laid on the floor, and she kicked, and she screamed. And when she was finished, the ECE gave her her 4 stickers anyway. And she said, why did you give me 4 stickers? Didn't you remember that I kicked and I screamed? And the ECE said to her, yeah, you had some really strong emotions, and you handled them really well. You didn't hurt anybody, you didn't break anything, you didn't scream at anyone, you just cried until you were calm. And that's a 4-sticker day. And I'm looking at the time and realizing I've given you no time for questions. I'm so sorry, but I am not going anywhere. So if you have questions, more than happy to to hang around. And I really want you to think about finding ways to build those relationships with children that will prevent the challenging behaviors. And that was a lot to squeeze into a very short session.
Thank you, Jan. This is Melinda. That was really a fabulous webinar, and thank you so much for providing so many really great stories and examples from the sector to really bring this topic to life. So I see there is a question or two, so if we do have a moment, one of the questions is really about language. So what about language barriers? So the question being, how could you support a child who maybe doesn't understand your language?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And I'm just going to say, you almost go back in your way of thinking to the way you are with an infant or a toddler. And you keep your language very simple, and you learn the keywords that the child needs. And there's sort of like a little set of keywords that a child needs. They need to be able to say, I want, I don't want, please, help, my turn. Some of those are really important things. And then you need to have the same kind of very clear messages back to them. I will help. I'm here. What do you need? And just really keep the conversation very simple, and also use photographs. I can't believe how successful one of the toddler teachers in a center I was visiting was with putting the flow of the day on the wall. And a little guy who had very little language was going up and pointing to the pictures and just trying to point to the pictures and say single words. Lunch, lunch, lunch. And I think that we adults have a little bit more problem with communication than children do when there's a language difference, because we like to use words to communicate. But deciding that you're going to be nonverbal in your communication can be really, really helpful. I had a little girl once, she didn't talk at all. And we had to watch her behavior just so closely. And I'm going to tell you another really fast story because it's beautiful. She was trying to connect with the teacher, but without words. And she watched how the teacher had tied a little boy's shoe. And she went close to where when I say teacher, I mean ECE. When she went close to where the ECE was and untied her shoe and then just stood there waiting. And luckily there was someone who was observing that was able to say to the ECE, you need to get over there and tie her shoe because she's sending you a message. So part of it is getting picture books, getting, photographs and symbols and things. And there's a really good website called Connectability. They're out of Toronto, and they have some really nice resources on communicating with children who don't have the language.